welcome you all to this new channel UPSC Ka Safar. And what you can expect from this channel is that I'll be providing you the summaries of editorials of the Hindu and the Indian Express every day. Also, what is the edition? If you see, there are so many channels that are giving you summaries of editorials already. What I'll be adding to it is we will take that specific topic from the day and we will add a few more editorials from past months or previous years, and then I'll try and include the links here, and we'll also have a little bit of discussion about those in a broader way. And the other thing that we can also add to is Rajya Sabha TV discussion on that specific topic. Right, I'll provide you all the links below the video. You can use it for reference, self-study, and I'll also provide the summaries for you. So today's topic for of the editorial is female leadership, weighing in on the efficacy of female leadership. This is written by Bhaskar Datta. So let's see what he is trying to say in this article. So he started by giving the example of Germany, Taiwan, and New Zealand. So what do these three countries have in common? That is, they have a women leadership. That it has women in leadership roles. So Germany is in Europe, Taiwan is in Southeast Asia, and New Zealand is near Australia. These three countries are in three different continents, but what they have done in common is that they have women leadership, as well as they have managed the pandemic better. Now, if you see, once the pandemic has started from March or April, that it has intensified, we could see so many reports and articles being published, written, which said that the nations which had women in charge have fared fairly better than the nations which had male leadership. So that is the study he's quoting. And the second study he goes on to quote is about the example of United States. In United States, he says that there is also a study that says the states which had female governors had fewer COVID-19 related deaths, perhaps partly because female governors acted more decisively by issuing earlier stay-at-home orders. Okay. So the authors of the study conclude that women leaders are more effective in their male counterparts than their male counterparts in times of crisis. Of course, this is the conclusion they've come to. Now, as expected, there is going to be a severe, strong critique to this study, who have questioned the reliability of this conclusion. So first thing is, it is dangerous to make sweeping generalizations based on one study. Okay, agreed. Now moving on. The point about the danger of making sweeping generalizations is valid. Of course, studies such as these do not establish the superiority of all female leaders over their male counterparts. Now, it is true that these countries have done better. It is true that the female leaders in these few countries have done better than their male counterparts, but it would be far-fetched to say that all female leaders in all the countries are going to be better administrators than the male counterparts. That is the first critique. I think it's fairly valid. Now, all female leaders are not necessarily efficient, and there are many men who have proved to be more effective, charismatic leaders. Fine. Now, he's again substantiating that same point. But the important takeaway from the recent experience and such study, necessity of. So, what is the takeaway for us? That we need to get rid of our inherent biases and perceptions about female effectiveness in the leadership roles. So we have biases against women that they do not belong to the leadership roles, they cannot work, they cannot go out, they cannot earn, they are not efficient, they cannot even a lot of people say that women are not good drivers and stuff like that. So we need to get rid of all these inherent biases and perceptions about female effectiveness. The second part of the editorial goes on to discuss about India's Gram Panchayats. So if you remember, the 73rd and 74th constitutional amendments have um, have brought in Panchayati Raj system. And in Panchayati Raj system we have given 1/3 of reserved seats for women. So importantly, female leaders also bring something quite different to the table. In particular, they perform significantly better than men in implementing policies that promote the interests of women. Okay, so when women are in the leadership roles, they have performed better in implementing policies that promote the interests of their own gender. This was demonstrated in another study conducted by Nobel laureate Esther Duflo and co-author Raghavendra Chattopadhyay. If you remember, Esther Duflo is the Nobel laureate along with her husband Abhijit Banerjee. They have been given Nobel Prize in Economic Sciences for managing, I think, alleviating global poverty. Okay, so these two people have done a study which says, who used the system of mandated reservation of pradhans. Pradhan is a sarpanch in gram panchayats to test the effectiveness of female leadership. So they have done studies in the villages to test the effectiveness of female leadership, where the villages have had women as pradhans. So as I discussed earlier, this was made possible by the 1993 amendment of the Indian Constitution, which said that all states had to reserve 1/3 of all pradhans, positions of pradhan for women. Now, moving on, the villages were selected and were studied. Chattopadhyay and Duflo concluded that pradhans invested, now this is the important part, invested more in rural infrastructure that served better for the needs of their own gender. So the villages which had women as pradhans have invested more in rural infrastructure that served the needs of their own gender. For instance, the example they're quoting is, women pradhans were more likely to invest in providing easy access to drinking water, since the collection of drinking water is primarily, if not solely, the responsibility of women. So what they're saying is, the women as pradhans have invested more on easy access to drinking water. If you remember these movies, and everywhere we see that women are carrying these bindis and buckets of water. They're bringing these from kilometers away from village. They have to walk 4 to 5 kilometers away to bring a bucket of water. So we have seen these visuals and scenes in the movies. So the pradhans of these villages are trying to get rid of that situation. They have invested, the study says that they invested more in easy access to drinking water. Now, in addition to the instrumental importance of promoting more space for women public policy, there is also important goal for perspective of gender equality. This is also important. The discussion moves on to the right to vote is arguably the most important dimension of participation in public life. So how do you participate in public life? The basic act of participation in public life is to have a right to vote. If you don't have a right to vote, you cannot participate in a public life. There are also other things, like what proportion of women stand for election to the various state and central legislatures. So how many women stand for election? How many are elected? Perhaps more important, how many women occupy important positions in the executive branch of government? So today we have Nirmala Sitharaman, and we had Sushma Swaraj, then Smriti Irani is another example, right? But these are very few people that are present in the positions of the power. So discussion moves on to the suffrage. What is suffrage? This is voting right. Okay. So one thing that we can be really proud as Indians is the achievement in so far as women's suffrage is concerned. Women were allowed to vote from 1950. The moment our constitution came into existence, the voting rights were given to women equally, right, with respect to the men, so that they can participate in equal footing with men from first general election of 1951-52. This is in striking contrast to the experience in so-called mature democracies. So we call the European countries and the United States as mature democracies. That is, they're older democracies and evolved democracies. But in the US, it took several decades of struggle before women were allowed to vote in 1920. They got the voting right only in 1920, after a lot of women organizations came out to the streets and demanded the right to vote. Most countries in Europe also achieved universal suffrage during the interwar period. Okay, so how did this happen in the Western countries? If you remember the World War I and World War II, 1914 and 1939 to 1945, many or most able-bodied men went away to the battlefields during the First World War. Increasing numbers of women had the opportunity to show that they were adequate substitutes in activities that were earlier the sole preserved. So once the men went out to the battlefields, there had to be someone who had to take their place, and that is when women stepped in and said that, okay, now we can do this same thing as well, right? They stepped into the roles of men and they performed extremely better. So that is when people started to take note that, okay, women can also do and perform, and even perform it more effectively and in a more better way. So this is how the anti-female bias was mitigated and earned women the right to vote in European countries. In India, we've had charismatic female leaders like Indira Gandhi, Jayalalitha, Mayawati, Sushma Swaraj, Mamata Banerjee, and many others. Interestingly, glaring example of gender stereotyping was the labeling of Indira Gandhi as the only man in the cabinet. So Indira Gandhi was called as the only man in the cabinet. See, why it is being called as the glaring example of a gender stereotyping. Even a woman who's performing well is being called as the only man in the cabinet. So that again tells you that women cannot perform better, only men can perform better. So that is why even Indira Gandhi was called as the only man in the cabinet. That is also gender stereotyping. Apart from these stalwarts, overall figures are depressing. The female representation in the current National today NDA government at the center is probably not very far from the typical gender composition in Indian central and state governments. Female members make up only about 10% of the total ministerial strength. The underrepresentation of female ministers in India is also reflected in the fact that Ms. Banerjee is currently the only female chief minister. So Mamata Banerjee is the only female chief minister of our country today. We've had Jayalalitha and Mayawati, but currently today there's only one female chief minister in the whole of the country. The underrepresentation of women in Indian legislature is even more striking. For instance, 2019 election sent the largest number of women to the Lok Sabha. Despite this, women constitute just over 14% of the total strength of the Lok Sabha. See, these kind of facts and figures are extremely important. Whenever there's this topic, this question about or essay about women empowerment, women in politics, women's reservation bill, you can quote these stats. You can even start your answer by quoting these stats that just over 14% total strength of the Lok Sabha are women. Or you can also say that in 2019 election, the largest number of women were sent to the Lok Sabha. Right? Even then, it is only just over 14%. So that is the contrast. This gives the dismal rank of 143 out of 192 countries for which data are reported by the Inter-Parliamentary Union. This is also again something that can be quoted in your answers. Right? Inter-Parliamentary Union says that India is ranked 143. You know, the country tiny Rwanda comes out on top with a staggering 60% of seats in its lower house. Moving on, so ultimately there are less women in the parliament and in our state assemblies. So the discussion moves on to the women's bill. So the women's bill was brought in first by Devegowda government some 20 to 30 years back, and till now it has not been passed. Let's see what the women's bill says. Since women running for elections face numerous challenges, it is essential to create a level playing field. Okay, this is again an affirmative action which is trying to create a level playing field through appropriate legal measures. The establishment of quotas for women is an obvious answer. I have mentioned earlier that mandated reservation for women in Gram Panchayats was established in all major states since mid 1990s. So, what is the example that the author is citing here? The reason, the example that succeeded is again the Gram Panchayat experimentation of women reservation. Attempts have also been made to extend quotas for women in the Lok Sabha and state assemblies through a women's reservation bill. Unfortunately, the fate of this bill represents a blot on the functioning of the Indian Parliament. The bill was first presented to the Lok Sabha by the H.D. Devegowda government in 1996. So, in 1996, Devegowda government had brought in the Women's Reservation Bill. Male members from several parties opposed the bill on various pretexts. Subsequently, interestingly, I have found an article from the Hindu which gives you a timeline of what has happened. Very interesting, disgusting, and sexist things that have happened in the whole in all of these in the last 20-24 years in Parliament. Whenever the bill was introduced, the bill papers have been torn and thrown. People from different parties have opposed it very vehemently. So I'll also provide you the link of that article below this video. Now moving on, subsequently both the NDA and United Progressive Alliance governments have reintroduced the bill in successive parliaments but without any success. Although Rajya Sabha did pass the bill in 2010, the Lok Sabha and the state legislature are yet to give their approval. So in 2010 the Rajya Sabha bill did pass, but what happened is the Lok Sabha dissolved in 2014, so the bill has also dissolved along with the Lok Sabha. Now it needs to be freshly reintroduced either in the Lok Sabha or Rajya Sabha. So 24 years have passed since it was first presented in the Lok Sabha. Steps to reducing prejudice. So what can be done to reduce this prejudice against having women in higher positions? Of course, there is a simple fix to the problem. So author says there is a simple fix to the problem. So the solution that he is prescribing is the major party constituents of NDA and UPA alliances can sidestep the logjam in Parliament. So leave out the Parliament, and how do we, by reserving say a third of party nominations for women. So this is quota within the party system. Now while the whole issue is that the bill is not being passed because 1/3 of women are needed it is a legal way. This is more of a quota, having a quota in the party system, where while you're nominating 543 members to before every election, every party releases a list of its candidates, the 543 candidates that they are fighting. So in that, they themselves can provide 1/3 of women candidates, right? That will solve this whole problem. This will surely result in increasing numbers of women in legislatures and subsequently in cabinets. The importance of this cannot be overestimated. There is substantial evidence showing that increased female representation in policy making goes a long way in improving perceptions about female effectiveness in leadership roles. See, only when you give them chance and once they prove, the prejudices will slowly get eradicated, right? They'll be in position of power, they will act, they will implement policies, and then slowly even men who think that they cannot perform will be able to look at them and say, there's not much difference. So for that to happen, you need to get them into those roles first. That is the primarily important thing. So as discussed, this decreases the bias among voters against women candidates and results in a subsequent increase in percentage of female politicians contesting and winning elections. So such quotas have a both short-term and long-term impact. Indeed, voter perceptions about the efficacy of female leadership may change so drastically in the long run that quotas may no longer be necessary. So once people actually see women being in the powerful positions and performing better than the male counterparts, the people will start asking that no, we need a women candidate from our constituency. Even if there's a law or there isn't, the people are going to come out on the street and ask that we need a women candidate from our constituency. So that basically summarizes this article. Hope you've understood what Bhaskar Datta was trying to tell you. Now, moving on, I have found a Rajya Sabha TV discussion on the same women reservation bill, and I have summarized it in a few points. So I'll just take you through these few points of that. So this is from the Rajya Sabha TV discussion. Again, today 12% of women, these are few facts, 12% women in parliaments, and assemblies it is less than 10%. Okay, these are facts that you can mention at the start of the answer. In Mizoram, very surprisingly, there's not even a single women MLA. Okay, what is the advantage of reservation? The example being quoted is women in Panchayati Raj have done extremely well as Sarpanch and Pradhans. So what is the current status of bill? As we said, it was passed in Rajya Sabha in 2010, but due to dissolution of Lok Sabha, the bill also dissolved. So need to start the process from the beginning. Okay, there's also another data set which says that women have only contribute 17% to the GDP in India, whereas in China, the contribution of women to the GDP is 31%. There's a famous quote by Aristotle which says, nothing is more unequal than the equal treatment of unequals. So when it comes to the this question, women empowerment, again on the same topic, you can even start the answer or an essay with a quote of this type. Like you can quote Aristotle, you can quote these data sets. Either way, it will give a unique dimension to your answer. A modern society cannot be built by ignoring women's issues. Agreed. Also, okay, there are two issues here. This whole discussion was done in the Rajya Sabha TV. I have just briefly written down the points that I thought were useful for us. So there's this debate 1 and this debate 2. Okay, what is this controversy here? That why men are rejecting this bill in the parliament. So there's a debate between the traditional women and modern working women. Traditional women who are mostly homemakers. Okay. Now, what if the panelist in that debate says that the men fear that all traditional women who are sticking to the households will become modern and they'll start working, they'll start going out, and that will a conservative idea of that will diminish or degrade our culture. The second debate here, I think this is more of a valid point of a criticism to the bill, is that women again are not a homogeneous entity, right? They are women from marginalized sections of society, that scheduled caste, scheduled tribe, the Adivasi women, women belonging to minorities, women belonging to oppressed groups, and then there are also elite upper class, upper caste, well-to-do families, rich families coming from urban backgrounds. Okay, there is a conflict between these two women from two different strata of the society. What if once the 1/3 reservation is given and all these positions of power are taken up by these women from elite and urban backgrounds, then what about these women? What will happen? These people were never empowered, and they are not going to be empowered because all the reserved seats are going to be usurped by this section of women. So I think that's a valid point that was made. Odisha Assembly has passed a resolution for women's reservation, and if all state assemblies go on to pass this resolution, it would create a bit more pressure on the parliament. Okay, another criticism is the fear of proxy leaders. So today we hear that even though women have been given this reservation in the Panchayati Raj, the men behind them are actually working. They are the people who are running the show. Even though women are sarpanch, men are running the show. That is the criticism. What if the same thing happens? Again, repeated example of Panchayat Raj success of reservation is being quoted. We need to look at that study in a more deeper way. Also, Article 15 of our Constitution speaks of positive discrimination for women and children. This is just merely quoting the Constitution, Article 15, that it also speaks of affirmative action. Okay, affirmative action, reservation, positive discrimination, these are very similar concepts. Reservation, okay, the another thing is reservation within reservation. This is also called as quota within quota. So already we have SC/ST reserved seats for SC/ST in the Lok Sabha parliamentary constituencies. Now, should we include them under the women category, or we need to give reservation within reservation, women and then again SC/ST women, or how this needs to be rolled out is another criticism that has been leveled. So this needs to be looked deeper and research is needed. Basically, the healthy discussion needs to start at all levels of our society. Rural areas, urban areas, the citizens should talk about it. There should be discussion in parliament, in different state assemblies, the civil society groups, the NGOs. All these people need to come together and have a healthy discussion how it needs to be implemented, how, when can we roll this over. Also, what are the other alternatives? See, as a civil servant, you are expected to give solutions and you are expected to give alternatives for every problem. So these are few alternatives. They say quota within political parties. Okay, forget about this whole legal thing. In the editorial also, Mr. Bhaskar Datta has spoke about this quota within political parties, that if it is UPA or NDA, what if they themselves decide that they will nominate 1/3, if they are to nominate say 90 people, what if they decide that they are going to nominate 30 women, right, in 30 constituencies, and also these people do nominate 30 women in the constitution? That quota within political parties would help immensely. What is the criticism though here is that the women will be given the losing seats, just a mere formality, like UPA knows that it's going to lose in maybe South, or NDA knows it's going to lose in some constituencies, then they'll just do that formality of giving women seats to the in the losing constituencies. That's a valid criticism again. So another thing is dual member constituency. Dual member constituency is something like man and women, right, both are going to be elected from same constituency. This is something that can be experimented, but what is the criticism for this? It's going to increase the number of representatives. It will increase the number of representatives, and the debate and the whole thing in the parliament will go for a toss. The third is to have a rotating constituency. So rotating constituencies, the reserved constituency will be rotating all over the country in the general elections. Here, see, for example, Hyderabad is one constituency. Okay, for example, now somebody named X male has run for 2019. He won. Now from 2019 to 2024, he'll work only if he knows that he has a chance again in winning 2024 elections. If this person does not have this incentive for running again in 2024, he might not put in the hard work that he was supposed to, right? He will anyways know that again the rotating constituency will come 2024, this will be given to some women named Y, so why should I put in the work? What is the incentive for me? So that is a criticism for rotating constituency thing. But overall, we need to understand that we have to start a healthy discussion at all levels in our society that